This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you have been paying attention to the clips coming out of OTAs and mini camps, you would have noticed that you have seen a lot of highlights from specifically Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond. And I think that is an important piece to the key of the Browns' success, not just where it would obviously affect it in the passing game, right? If two receivers, particularly deep threats, got good on this team. But where I think the impact can be even more pronounced is actually in the Browns' run game. Here's why I think that. One, let's say that Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond can combine this year 1,200 extra yards, right? I don't know what Isaiah Bond got last year, but that'd probably be almost 1,000 more yards than you got last year just from those two players alone. So, one, you would have the added benefit of going from 2,800 receiving yards last year to 3,800, which is a much, much more respectable number and indicative of more successful trips downfield for sure. But think about how much of an impact that would make, just those 1,200 yards, and how those two players are capable of getting those yards and what that means if they're getting that kind of production, where the Browns are having success if they're having that kind of production. And think about the impact that would have on something like the Browns' run game, which really, really struggled last year, right? Just having a valid deep threat would mean that the Browns or teams playing the Browns would have to have their safeties be in conflict, off jump, because they have to worry about the Browns' deep threats when they're out there. Particularly with Denzel Boston, I think this is interesting because Denzel Boston is a big guy who can block. So not only can he be out there as a deep threat, but he's a legitimate run blocker, right? And you have the opportunity, let's say you can squeeze something out of Cedric Tillman this year, right? When you run heavier personnel, or maybe you want to get away with not running heavier personnel, not putting an extra tight end out there, but still being big enough to run around the edges with Casey Concepcion, having two big receivers like Denzel Boston and Cedric Tillman that can block would really go a long way in making your team a lot more flexible when it comes to what they can run out of and what they can get away with in play action and all of those things. So, keep that in mind for people who do want to just rush to cut Cedric Tillman. I think there's a lot of utility you can get out of having two big bodies on this team versus one big body on this team. It's not just redundancy. I think it does unlock a level of flexibility if you can get some productivity out of Cedric Tillman, which the question with him has been consistency, not his ability to be productive. But let's get back to Bond and Denzel Boston and their impact on the run game. Because to kind of understand what kind of impact those two would have if they have success this year on the run game, in order to understand that, we have to understand why the Browns' run game was not successful last year. It's easy when they don't perform like they did to just say that, this Kevin scheme sucked and, they couldn't block and all that stuff that people just say as blanket reasons for why the Browns could not run the ball. But there were very specific things happening to the Cleveland Browns last year in the run game that were affecting their ability to run the ball. And I think it all stems back to the fact that the Browns, they didn't scare defenses with anything that they were capable of doing when it comes to throwing the football. There wasn't a legitimate threat on the team when it comes to the Browns' ability to stress defenses vertically, horizontally, in any direction but the middle, right? Teams were only really worried about the Browns having run game success, and teams pretty much played the Browns like that. And that ended up causing a number of issues that the Browns could not play design their way out of. One of my biggest complaints about the Browns' run game was that they just kind of settled on running the ball out of the same personnel sets, and really condensing their run game to like 3 or 4 different things that they felt like they could do at a high level. And they couldn't do any of those things at a high level execution-wise. But the reason they ended up in that position is very specific. The Browns had no way of forcing a defense to spread out. Like, they couldn't force a defense to spread out. They could line up and empty. They've tried it a couple of times. They could go 5 wide. Like, they could do all of this stuff to try to force a defense to be more spread out. But nobody was afraid of their ability to execute out of any of those sets. So what ends up happening when teams aren't really afraid is that, hey, if you're a safety, you're not going to be as worried about getting beat over top. You're just going to start to keep an eye towards the run game, and that's going to lead to a numbers advantage for that defense, right? 4 down linemen, 1 extra safety, that's 5-on-5 plus 2 linebackers. Or, you know, you might even get the other safety to roll down, and then we're talking about 5-on-5 plus an extra safety plus 2 linebackers. That's 3 gaps right there, plus whatever the DBs are keeping an eye on, right? Like, that's how you end up with a condensed ability to run the football. So since the Browns would be at a numbers disadvantage whenever they would run the ball out of 11P or any other kind of set that they want to run the ball in, they were kind of forced into this predicament where they could really only run the ball out of 12 and 13 personnel. Now, I heard a lot that the reason people thought that the Browns' run game was bad was simply because teams were stacking the boxes. That's not exactly what happened. Teams were stacking the box against the Cleveland Browns, but it wasn't really intentional. It was just a consequence of how the Browns were lining up offensively that created the amount of stacked boxes that the Browns were playing. Because if you're playing 12P and you have 2 tight ends near the line of scrimmage, or 13P and you have 3 tight ends near the line of scrimmage, just count the number of players between the hashes in those formations, right? 5 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends. We're talking about 7 people plus a quarterback plus a running back. Simple numbers give you 8, 9, and if you have 13 personnel, we're talking about 10 players right there that naturally force defenses to be where, right? If you have all of those players on the line of scrimmage, the defense is naturally going to line up close to those players. And if you are condensed, they're condensed, which means that they're in the box. They weren't going into the game plan against the Browns stacking the box on purpose. They stacked the box and played heavy personnel because the Browns were playing heavy personnel and condensing their formations, which led to stacked boxes. And the reason the Browns were playing that way and running the ball that way is because that was the only way that they can get a reasonable numbers game in the run game when they wanted to run the ball. Because they tried to run the ball out of 11, they're going to deal with the numbers game that we talked about, right? 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers who aren't that scared of you going vertical, and 2 safeties that aren't that scared of you going vertical. You do the numbers right there. It's not great. It's not great numbers for you. So at least if you stack the box or you stack the line of scrimmage, you get those numbers near the ball. You could try to pull, kick to go back. But the problem with the Browns' run game was the more condensed they made it, the easier they made it for lesser athletes to be able to cover the run against the Cleveland Browns. And when you can get away with a lesser athlete in the run defense, you're going to play bigger athletes, which meant that the Browns were now at a strength disadvantage because the defense can play their bigger players against the Browns' relatively light offensive line. Basically, the Browns' personnel forced the Browns offensive line to play a game that they weren't ever designed to play, which led to the play looking like it did. This is why it felt like the Browns offensive line couldn't get any push. This is why it felt like the Browns offensive line wasn't physical enough. This is why it felt like the Browns run game was always behind the line of scrimmage, always cramped, because it was, and the reason it was is because the Browns were so limited that they would let defenses get away with things that put them in an obvious disadvantage, and they had no real option to adjust to. This is probably why Kevin Stefanski was frustrated as hell that he got fired, and there's part of me that is sympathetic to that argument, but you just can't have the offense be as bad as it was, no matter what the reason is, 2 years in a row, and expect to keep your job when you are an offensive mind. Also, Stefanski contributed to these problems, right? His tendency to kind of turn the offense into a check down machine because of his fear of turning the ball over, his preferences at wide receivers not really leading to the Browns having any deep threat, and honestly, the way that he didn't even try to fix the problems in the run game by at least trying some versatility in it, right? Like, I understand why theoretically he did not want to do it. But once your run game had been struggling to the point that it had, why not try everything? Why go down doing the one thing that you know you can't do? All of those are good reasons for why Kevin ended up getting fired at the end of the day. So don't write this as a apology letter to Kevin Stefanski for why he should be still here or something. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that the Browns had some structural problems that created a limitation on how good they were ever going to be in the run game, whether they played better or not, that they have seemingly addressed with the addition of guys like Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond, who can be legitimate deep threats for this team and legitimate boundary threats for this team, which is something that this team desperately needs. Now, how does this relate back to Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond? Well, I'll tell you that right after I thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. So how does this relate back to Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond, the topic of this video? Well, if those two can be legitimate producers, right, in the way that they're going to be productive. Denzel Boston is a 50-50 ball guy and a legit downfield threat, right? He's going to be pushing vertical a lot. He's going to be somebody you use on the boundary and get downfield. Isaiah Bond's going to be a deep threat guy. He's going to be a deep shot guy. Those are both players that force safeties to play the Browns honestly, even if they don't think much of the quarterback play of the Cleveland Browns. The threat of getting beat deep is just too great to allow for that possibility. So they're gonna be more worried if those two players can be productive about getting beat deep, even if you think very little of the Browns quarterback room. NFL defenses understand that the easiest places for quarterbacks to win are on the boundary and to the line of scrimmage, right? So if you don't think your quarterback play is going to be good, you need ways to win on the boundary, and you need ways to win at the line of scrimmage. Line of scrimmage, because those are the easiest passes to complete, very low barrier to complete. Now, deep passes aren't super easy to complete, but they are easy to identify, right? everybody here has played Madden and been able to identify when one of their boundary receivers gets a great release and opens free, right? It is not the most difficult thing for a NFL quarterback to do, to identify that, right? So if you don't think your quarterback play is going to be necessarily great, you want to put them in positions to identify things that are easier to identify and quicker to identify, and hope that they can capitalize on it with a good enough throw, which if somebody gets beat deep, usually the margin, the window on that throw is not a tight window throw. So that is why it matters to the Browns to be able to win on the boundary, right? It's going to keep defenses honest. Even if you don't think the quarterback play is going to be good, it keeps defenses honest. And if the Browns can keep defenses honest and force them to play the Browns straight up, then that means that the Browns can actually run the ball out of different personnel packages and different sets and do a lot of different things to try to get the ball in Quinshawn's hand, which means you won't see the Browns run into stacked boxes or have to feel like they're getting overpowered because of the personnel that they're allowing into the game on the other side of the ball with what the Browns are trying to do. Now, I think the possibility for that to go down is pretty good from what we've seen so far. We're watching Denzel Boston win and get some great 50-50 balls, but really run some clean routes and really just play some honest-to-God good football out there, right? Isaiah Bond is getting separation. I got to see what the routes look like with Isaiah Bond, because that was easily the most shaky part of his game last year, was just the route running and some of his instincts when route running. A lot of times he didn't get his eyes around in situations he should have got his eyes around, even for a rookie. But the ability to separate, because he has that speed, that quickness is there. And it seems like that's really showing itself in camp. Now, again, Denzel Ward's not out there. Our secondary is kind of weak, and we have guys missing right now. So take what you're seeing at minicamp with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? There are some guys that are probably looking a little bit better than they actually are because they're just not playing against great competition right now. Or maybe we're going to figure out at the start of the season that what we were seeing from these wide receivers should have been a red flag about our corners. We might get to that point too. But nonetheless, what we've seen, right, and we've seen Denzel Boston have great reps against guys like Tyson Campbell, who are legit NFL corners. So we know that he can do it. And then Isaiah Bond, we've seen do it in games. So it's not just camp we're getting excited about. We're applying what we've seen from these players playing careers, especially Isaiah Bond, and applying it to what we're seeing now. You add that on top of the Zay Flowers-like element that they have planned for Casey Concepcion, and you can start to see the safety harness being built for an offense that can find success despite not knowing what they're going to get from quarterback, right? And that's what the Browns are trying to build, right? They're trying to put this roster in a position to where it's easy to slot a quarterback in and have success. Think the Seattle Seahawks. Think the Denver Broncos as templates for what the Browns want to do, right? Maybe they don't have the Kyle Shanahan-like genius that can fix the offense, and they don't have Sean Payton. But if they can build something to where the barrier for success of talent that you need is not as high as most places, maybe the Browns can find a way to get somebody out there that can stay out there and actually develop that person going forward. We'll see what happens, but that's certainly a plan. And I think Isaiah Bond and Denzel Boston are incredibly important to that plan. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.